Hi, everybody. This is Vicki Pretlow, a program specialist with the Division of Energy Assistance within the Office of Community Services. I'd like to welcome you all to today's webinar on behalf of OCS. Today's call will provide you with reminders for completing the fiscal year 2019 Performance Data Form's first module, Module 1, also known as the Grantee Survey. We'll be hearing from two presenters today, Melissa Torgerson and Dan Bausch, both from Apprise. Next slide, please. Today's webinar has two purposes. The first is to provide you with a brief refresher to Module 1 of the LIHEAP Performance Data Form, which again is also called the Grantee Survey. State grantees and the District of Columbia are required to complete this report each year as a part of federal LIHEAP reporting requirements. The second purpose of this webinar is to provide you with important reminders about the reporting rules for the Grantee Survey, how the data is reviewed and validated, and the common reporting issues to check for and avoid. The main audience for this webinar includes LIHEAP coordinators, staff, and/or contractors who have worked on the Grantee Survey in the past and need a brief refresher on the main items to remember. If you're new and have not worked on the Grantee Survey before, this webinar will be helpful to you as well, but we also encourage you to download the slides from December's webinar, which covered the report in more detail. And you'll find those slides attached as a handout to this webinar for your convenience. And then lastly, just as an FYI, an action transmittal is expected to be published soon regarding the fiscal year 2019 LIHEAP Performance Data Form. So with that, we hope that this training webinar is valuable to you, and we thank you for your time and attention. And I'll go ahead and hand it over to Melissa Torgerson so we can jump right in. Melissa?
Thank you, Vicki. So just an overview of today, we're going to be spending about 30 minutes reviewing key information. As Vicki mentioned, slides are available for download now under the handouts section of the GoToWebinar sidebar. And so if you don't see the sidebar, there's a little orange arrow you can click that will maximize that. This webinar is being recorded and will be published on the ACF YouTube channel. If you have a question, we encourage you to ask questions as you have them by typing them into the GoToWebinar box. We also ask that if questions are unique to you or your state, and we will reach out to you after the webinar to answer them, and if they're relevant for the whole United States that we're covering, then we'll go ahead and answer them here on the webinar. But we are short for time. So we want to get started. Before we begin, we want to catch any questions you might have on completing the Grantee Survey. There are directions here on how to ask a question. You can go ahead and put in a question for staff. Once again, if the sidebar is minimized, go ahead and hit the orange arrow. Well, I'm going to go ahead and outline the rest of the survey the rest of the webinar while you all are thinking of questions. Many of you have been working on this report, and you may have stumbled across questions that you have. So if you have them, this is the time to go ahead and ask. And as you type in those questions, I'm going to go ahead and explain some of the sections of the survey on the next slide. So Jorge, do you mind switching forward? So Dan's done a really good job for those of you who want to go back after the webinar and find particular areas that you want to cover on particular slides. This is the kind of outline of the deck. And it's a short webinar, but as he mentioned, or as Vicki mentioned, we have also attached the step-by-step overview, which was a 90-minute webinar going over every piece of the Grantee Survey. This is just going to highlight reminders and things that we often catch when we do these when we review reports on grantees. So, Jorge, do we have any questions from folks?
Yeah, we have two questions. The first one is, can you talk about how to report the average benefit amounts?
Sure. Hi, this is Dan. In the Grantee Survey, when you report information on your uses of funds in Section 4, you report the total amount of funds that you obligated to heating assistance and cooling assistance and crisis assistance components, for example. You're also asked to report the average benefit amount that households received for each type of assistance. That is something that should be calculated using the information you have in your data system or in your records on the benefit amounts each household received. So, for example, for heating assistance, you have in your records the different amounts of heating assistance each household received. You'd want to add them up and calculate the average for all households that got heating assistance. And that's important because some states give one benefit, some states give multiple. Some states may decide at the end of the year to give a supplemental benefit. And there's a question at the end of the Grantee Survey, a yes/no question, just to indicate if you can't calculate the average benefit for a specific type of assistance and it's estimated, you can use that yes/no indicator to mark that.
Thanks, Dan. And then the other question that we got is, we plan to operate weatherization in fiscal year 2019, but we didn't start weatherizing until recently. How is that reported?
That is also a good question that comes up for different states each year. And in that situation, the Grantee Survey is focused for your uses of funds on, for this year, for the funds you had available for fiscal year 2019, where did you obligate them? And so if you obligated funds towards weatherization and getting a weatherization component in place, but you actually haven't dispersed the fund, provided the weatherization yet, then you would report those funds if you have obligated them to weatherization. And you could just include a note indicating we obligated these funds to weatherization, but we reported in our household report that no households were weatherized because we're going to be weatherizing them during fiscal year 2020. Jorge, I think you're on mute.
Thanks, Dan. There are no more questions.
Okay, we'll go on and we'll take questions again at the end. Okay, so the LIHEAP performance data form, we'll just do a quick overview of that report as a reminder for everyone. The LIHEAP performance data form is an annual report that you submit each year to HHS. All 50 states in the District of Columbia submit the report. It has 3 different modules. Module 1 is the focus of this webinar, and that's the Grantee Survey. The Grantee Survey is focused on providing OCS and providing Congress and the public with information about the sources of funds for each state grantee and how those funds were obligated and used. For fiscal year 2019's performance data form, there are no changes from fiscal year 2018. So the form layout and structure are the same, and the reporting requirements are the same as those for last year's fiscal year 2018 performance data form. As Vicki mentioned, there has not been an action transmittal published yet for the fiscal year 2019 report. That should be coming soon, but if you see on the bottom of this slide, that is the link to the 2018 action transmittal with the instructions, and those can be used or provided to your staff who are working on the report. Now we're going to do some reminders of the main reporting rules for the Grantee Survey.
Okay, so these are reporting rules. Some of them apply to all the reports, and some of them are unique to the Grantee Survey. All reports, LIHEAP reports, should be completed according to the official instructions. So I'd really recommend those of you who might think you know what you're doing or have been doing this a long time, take a look at those instructions again and make sure that you are completing it in a way that's compliant with the federal standards. We ask that you furnish information for the appropriate fiscal year reporting period. This is the federal fiscal year that begins on October 1st. We know some of you run programs during other time periods, but we're asking you to report for the federal fiscal year. To provide a consistent report where total sources of funds equal total uses of funds. There are some exceptions to this if you're returning funds back to HHS, but really this is about balancing your checkbook, what money came in to the program year or to the federal fiscal year 2019, and what money did you obligate, and what money is going out. And then really anytime that there's a unique program feature or nuance, or you're putting in a number but you feel like it needs an explanation or a caveat, please liberally use the notes section. This really helps us to review your reports, and these notes, where relevant, will also go in the report to Congress to explain any numbers that may seem a little wonky. Now we'll talk about data validation and checks.
So as many of you are familiar with, you enter your reports into the OLDC system or Grant Solutions. And in that system, there are automated messages that can appear to either notify you of a potential data issue that you should check, or of a potential major problem like a typo or a missing piece of information. So those validation checks, there's two types: warning messages. Those can pop up just to tell you that something may be an issue, and you may need to add a note to explain it if it's not an issue. So warning messages don't prevent you from submitting your report. They're really meant to be a helpful tool so that you can make sure your report is accurate before you submit it. Fatal error messages are indications that something's inconsistent in what's been entered, and that is an issue that would need to be addressed and fixed before you can submit your report. With both of those, if you have questions or are hitting any barriers, you can reach out to anyone on the Apprise team. After you submit your reports, we do review the reports, and we will reach out and email you with any questions or any issues we see based on that review. And then once your report is complete, your liaison accepts it in OLDC, but you can always go back later if you need to submit a correction or make a change by submitting a revision. As I mentioned, we do check your Grantee Survey data. This slide just presents information on the kind of checks that we do, that you can also do yourself as you review the report you receive from your fiscal staff or other staff. The first type of check we do is internal consistency checks within the Grantee Survey, and that mainly consists of checking if all of the sources you had available are accounted for in Section 4 when you report how funds are obligated or used. The second type of check we do is we do compare your report to the model plan that you submitted for fiscal year 2019. And in some cases, there may be something in the model plan that needs to be updated. And there's an example here that talks about the annual maximum income for a specific type of assistance. We would expect what's in the Grantee Survey to match what was in the original submitted plan for fiscal year 2019. And then lastly, we do also compare what's in your Grantee Survey to the other reports you submit to HHS. One example is the carryover funds, the funds that you did not obligate and are carrying over to obligate in the next fiscal year, we do check the amount in your grantee survey against what is in your current carryover and reallotment report. So those are the checks we do. Now we're going to talk about some of the common reporting issues and some reminders related to them.
So the first common reporting issue that we see in the field is people who feel they need to report expenditures and not obligations. So remember that Section 4 asks you to report on the uses of LIHEAP funding that was available to your state in FY 2019. And uses of funds means everything that was obligated for use during the federal fiscal year 2019. Now, obligation is defined by each state, but in many cases, obligated funds aren't actually expended until after the end of the fiscal year. For many of you, the definition of obligation includes funds that are obligated or contracted to subgrantee organizations or encumbered in contracts, IT contracts or other service contracts. The definitions range from state to state, but it's very important to remember that we're talking about money that's been formally allocated, encumbered, obligated to within your state and among your network, and not necessarily expended. What it should not include are funds that were not obligated by the end of 2019 and will be returned to OCS. So these are funds that are probably sitting in your state office that have not yet been allocated or tied up in a contract. We also don't want to see funds that were obligated in 2019 or 18, even if they were expended during the FY 2019 year. Keep in mind, this is a report about how 2019 award funds were shot out across your network, contracted, obligated, and in some cases expended, but expenditures are not the key piece of this report. Another common reporting issue we have is consistency with model plan and household report. If you reported assisting households with a type of assistance in your household report, you should be able to report the following for that type of assistance in your grantee survey. Total funds obligated in FY 2019. So how much money did you put toward cooling, for example? Average household benefit, as Dan mentioned earlier in the presentation, this is actually, if you go into your system and pull an average benefit of what each client got in terms of assistance, this is the number you want to use. And then maximum annual dollar income for a 4-person household. The maximum annual dollar income amount should be consistent with a standard you specified for eligibility in your model plan. And once again, as Dan mentioned, you may have households that were served with weatherization in your household report, but the funding was, say, from 2018, in which case it's not going to be in your grantee survey, and we need a note to explain that. And there are all kinds of those little nuances. So whenever you run into them, leave a note. Otherwise, you'll be getting a call from us.
Reporting carryover amounts is a common issue, especially for people who are newer to the grantee survey. Just as a reminder, carried over funds, according to the LIHEAP statute, those are funds that you have not obligated that were available. You can carry up to over 10% of your funds payable to the state for that fiscal year for obligation in the following fiscal year. The grantee survey asks you to report 2 different carryover amounts. You report the amount of funds that was carried over from the prior fiscal year into the fiscal year that the report is focused on. In this case, this would be fiscal year 2018 funds that were unobligated and were carried over to obligate in fiscal year 2019. That gets reported in the sources of funds section. And then the second carryover amount you're asked to report is the amount of funds that were available for fiscal year 2019 that you're carrying over to obligate in fiscal year 2020. So that first field, funds carried over from the previous fiscal year, that's reported in line 6 of section 3. That field actually gets pre-populated in the OLDC system using the prior FY18 reports. But you should check that amount to make sure it's correct and matches your records. And you can edit it if necessary to reflect the more accurate amount of funds carried over into fiscal year 2019. If you do update that line, there'll be a warning message alerting you that it's different from your prior report, and you can just include a note to indicate you confirm that amount is correct and that you intended to update that line. You don't need to go back and revise your prior submitted FY18 reports. The second carryover amount that you report under uses of funds, funds that were carried over into fiscal year 2020, that's line 7 of section 4. You should only be reporting the FY 2019 funds that were not obligated and that you're carrying over. If the amount you put in line 7 of your grantee survey does not match the carryover amount you reported recently in your fiscal year 2019 carryover and reallotment report, we will ask you to submit a revision to the fiscal year 2019 carryover and reallotment report with the correct amount. And one important reminder we wanted to alert you all of is that you completed that FY19 carryover and reallotment report in August or September, and HHS issued the final amount of FY19 funds after many of you completed that initial report. So you will need to go in and initiate a revision to update that report to reflect that final funding release. If you have any questions about that, there's a slide about it in the webinar handout, and you can reach out to us at Apprise. Okay, this slide is a cheat sheet slide that has many of the points we just discussed. We think that these are really helpful because you can print them out and put them in your folder or save them or give them to other staff. And these are just key reminders to be able to complete the grantee survey accurately. Report obligation of funds, as Melissa said. You want to report on all types of assistance you provided during fiscal year 2019, even if you're not providing a certain type of assistance currently. If you provided it in 2019, you want to be reporting on that. You want to report the carryover amounts. You want to confirm that your total sources of funds equals your total uses. And you want to add notes to make sure that your program components are accurately understood and that any important details can be noted. Now we're going to do some final reminders.
So we're going to buzz through these pretty quick, but keep in mind you can always call and ask us questions. There are no changes to the 2019 performance data form. The requirements are the same as last year. The 2019 performance data form, both module 1 and 2 are due on January 31st. If for some reason you cannot meet this, you must request an extension from your OCS liaison. And remember that the performance data form has to be entered, saved, certified, and submitted in OLDC, which can be a lengthy process, so give yourself enough time to get this done by the deadline. These are OLDC resources, and so you've got a login there as well as help desk information. You can, if you are having trouble getting a hold of them or can't get the help you need, contact your liaison or Apprise, and we'll help get you in touch with the right person. This is the third of 4 webinars on completing the LIHEAP performance data form. We'll have an additional 30-minute webinar to go over common issues and reminders with the performance measures portion of the performance data form on Monday, January, actually I think that's Tuesday. Is that Tuesday, Dan? January 21st?
Yeah, I apologize. That should be Tuesday.
Okay, so Tuesday, so it's next Tuesday, same time a week from today at 3 p.m. Eastern.
So here are links to different resources. You can contact us at Apprise, any of us at the bottom. One item I wanted to point out is among the handouts, there is a document called the Check Before You Submit document. That's really helpful at being able to go through the grantee survey and say, yes, I did it this way. No, I didn't do it this way. I'll go back and check it. It's just a tool to help you to be able to assess your own report before you submit it. So that's available as a handout. Okay, now we will take any other questions that you've submitted through the question box on the right. Any questions, Jorge?
Yes, we have one question right now, and the question is, where do we report outreach expenses?
That's a good question. The Grantee Survey does not have a line for every possible category that you may be able to think of. So you will be asking yourself, where do I report this item? The first place to look is to look in the instructions and see what the instructions say about that. And then if you're not sure, you can also reach out to us. With outreach, there is some flexibility. Many grantees consider outreach part of their program component expenses, so they might report it under that program component. But you can also report it under admin planning costs as well. The important thing is just to know where you're reporting your components based on how you may categorize them and track them, and what the instructions say about where to report specific funds.
Yeah, and I just want to clarify, if you're putting it in admin, but it's a program cost, just make sure you add a note so that when we review your report, we can back that out of your 10% admin cap.
And there's one more question that came in. The question is, I think the hard thing about carryover funds is when we get refunds from the utilities. How do we address that for the report?
Melissa, do you want to talk a little bit about refunds, and then I'll jump in?
Yeah, sure. So here's the thing, it used to be that you could update these reports into infinity. And so one of the things that we've said is you really need to just go back and update last year's report. Here's the thing, you're doing a federal financial report at the end of December, and by that time, you should be reporting you should have a really good sense of what you're carrying over into, the current year from the previous year. And so unless something's changing between when you filed that report at the end of December and January, what you should just plan on doing is as soon as your FFR is done, you should go in and update your carryover to reflect whatever your FFR says. And then that number should hold for a while. We understand that refunds can continue to come in, and so if you go in once this summer and once in December and update those numbers, you should be good for all of your reporting. But we can talk more about that with people. But usually if you use those kind of time stakes, that's a good way to keep things updated without doing a whole lot of extra work.
Yep. I would echo what Melissa said, and also just a reminder that with the Grantee Survey, it's not intended as a auditing document, but it is a report to be able to see how each state grantee is using their funds, and it's valuable information for Congress and for the public to be able to see that and see how it changes over time.
So before you all leave, we have a huge favor to ask. We have a very quick poll, so before you all hang up, you can take the, click your response. We just want to see how confident you are that you understand how to correctly complete Module 1 of the Performance Data Form, the Grantee Survey. Are you very, somewhat, not too, or not at all confident? This will help us as we plan future webinars in this area. And we always welcome your comments and feedback if you'd like to provide them privately or to OCS or to anyone.
As we also said, we do have our webinar 1 week from today at 3 o'clock on the performance measures modules. So we hope you can join us for that 30-minute webinar as well.
Great. It looks like folks are in the very and somewhat confident category. As we mentioned at the top of this call, for those of you who are somewhat confident and may have some remaining questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. Even with the most minor questions, we help folks with this stuff every day, and we'd be happy to share what we know and what we've learned to help you through this so you're not spending a lot of extra time on it. We appreciate you all attending today and hope you have a great rest of the week.
Thank you for your time. Have a great day.